Welcome back to the Resupply with me, Guy Next Door.
And me, Than.
Bringing you your weekly double tap of all things Laserforce and Space Marines. This week, it would be lonely if it was just me and Than. Every week we decide to have one of you lovely Laserforce community come on the podcast and talk shit about Space Marines and Laserforce with us. So this week, he's been on the podcast before. Like to welcome back to the mic our man Russ, or Maniac. How are you, man?
Doing great, guys. Glad to be back.
It's good to have you back. This week, I know this is something that Than's been wanting to talk about for many, many weeks now.
And to be fair, not just me. There has been request from the community. Well, and by the community, I think I mean Russ.
Yeah. You know what? I think also the community, I'd probably say Russell. Like, anytime that I think either Russell or Than, stats is right there alongside both of you. So we thought this week we would talk about the stats website and the progression of where our stats have come from and where they are now. Because obviously right now there's so much in-depth analysis into our game. I feel almost like a professional sports person. Almost. Just a little more curvy. But yeah. So, Than, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we can do that. Now, for those of you listening to this podcast that may not be aware of the Laserforce stats site that is the community-run site, one, I'm really going to ask if you're really that serious about the tournament scene, because, man, how are you not aware of the lfstats.com website?
You're missing out.
You are totally missing out. For all of you listening to the pod, I have Russ to thank for lfstats.com. In its current form, without Russ, there is no LF stats.
We appreciate it. We very much appreciate it.
Not only do we appreciate it, but for all of you who will be attending Nats this year with Russ, maybe buy him a drink or three, because you guys genuinely have no idea how much time he has actually spent doing things, making improvements, making tweaks, the site better, and he'll say, it's something that he enjoys doing, and that's fine. That's fine. We all do this because we enjoy it,
and we're crazy.
Yes, but I'm just saying, if you see Russ,
Fireball Maniac,
maybe something like that. But yeah, definitely, he deserves having a few drinks and meals bought for him by the community for the amount of, work and joy that he's given to all of us at this point by making the stats easily accessible to everybody who, wants to see them, in every site that wants to do them as well. So, yeah.
And, we also got to give credit to Sean Grady, also known as Renzer here in Sacramento as well. He wrote the code that actually turns the scorecards into data that I can actually use. And without that part, none of it works. And that's the part I have no idea to do. So, thank you again, Sean.
Yeah, no, I mean, Maniac does get credit for the for the customer facing side of it for sure. But yeah, no, we cannot overlook the contribution that Renzer made to this, in as much as he wrote the original parser that let us take PDF files and turn them into text files to actually do things with in the original form. But as far as where all this kind of came from originally, if we're going to go back on the kind of the start of the modern stats era, as it were, we're actually we actually have to go back to the early 2000s. We're talking like 2001, 2002 ish. Prior to that, everything was just kind of on random spreadsheets. I have no idea where any of those spreadsheets are anymore. I'm sure they were lost in one of the many, hard drive crashes that I had over the years. But it was actually originally a Oakleigh player, Xtremes, who does not play anymore. He actually wrote the original Laserforce and Analyzer program, and if I remember right, it was like a VB front end over an Access database. Because trying to mess with Access directly is a pain in the ass at the best of times. So he gave a nice little GUI in the front of it, and it was all manual entry. But
so you were just printing scorecards and typing in numbers, huh?
Printing scorecards and typing in numbers, but at the time, because of how we were doing it, we only needed 2 scorecards per game. We just needed the medics, because in the original scorecards, though, like a single person scorecard had everybody's score, everybody's accuracy, everybody's position, and if you're taking the medics, you've got the medic hits. And that was all that we were tracking in that program at that time. So player, team, position, score, accuracy, and then the way he had the application set up is there were 2 customizable columns, and one of them was always medic hits, because what else are you going to do? And then the other one at tournaments we would use for MVP points, because and MVP points back in the day were different than what they are now. It was literally after the game, the refs would, basically vote on who had been the first, second, and third best player.
It was like
in
best,
the game.
best and fairest, right? That's what it was.
Really?
Yeah, best and fairest. And so it was, one person would get 3 points, somebody else would get 2 points, somebody else would get 1 point, and that was it.
So, at this point in time, we're tracking medic hits, we're tracking score. Was anything like hit diff tracked? Obviously MVP points as we know them today weren't, but was it really kind of those little stats?
Those little stats. We didn't really have a way to track hit diff at that point easily, because the mindset time was like, okay, we've got the 2, we get the 2 medic scorecards. Well, if you want to get everything, you have to get all 12 scorecards, which obviously we do now. But in that original form, you could save the scorecards as a text file, but really, while I think there was the desire to kind of know stuff like hit diff and things like that, because we're all huge nerds and we all kind of want to see these things. There wasn't necessarily enough community desire or the expertise, which isn't to say that there weren't people that knew how to write code in the community in those days, because I'm sure there were. Because again, we're huge nerds in this community. There are definitely people in this community that can write code, but it just wasn't anything that ever really surfaced.
You were just living in the dark ages.
We're just living in the dark ages, and it was a lot of manual data entry. I had definitely remember a lot of tournaments. That was people print out scorecards, they walk the scorecards to me, and I'm entering scores and stuff and not having to ref. It was fantastic. So really for me, it was a way to not have to ref, because who really enjoys refing?
You sold it pretty well too, because you'd look over into your little corner and you've got the patented Thanatos grimace on your face, and people are like, oh, what's wrong with that guy? Oh, leave Thanatos, he's doing stats. But secretly, you're in your nirvana. No reffing, stats-based heaven.
I'm not going to say there wasn't a little bit of that, because there definitely was, but there was also always kind of the time crunch of trying to make sure stuff was getting entered in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
And then having to make sure that, as you're entering it, it's 100% accurate. Because, there's nothing worse than having someone go back and like be checking your work later and you've made a mistake and you flipped a number on some data entry and it changes positional averages, it changes medic kits. I mean, just all these things that you have to be 100% accurate with the data entry.
It's my nightmare even today that someone's going to find some bug in the stats site and it's going to change like where a trophy goes. It keeps me up.
Didn't Rusty say something after the last time we spoke? he said something that wasn't even stat site related, which caused you to freak out a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely it did. Yes, because I take this way too seriously.
So I'll be looking out this week on Facebook.
So when did MVP points as we know them start to come around? I mean, where was that genesis?
So that genesis was right around. I'm trying to think, because I mean this is one of these things that you start kind of getting into, old man brain trying to remember things. It was kind of a thing that Al and Tragedy, I think, came to similar things separately, and then they talked and was like, hey, this is a good idea. So I want to say it was kind of in the like 2009, 2010 range, and it was probably actually before that. But we had the issue with when the Laserforce software was originally moved from DOS to Windows, and kids. That didn't start happening until 2006. Laserforce was on DOS for a really long time. But
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yes, but you started getting into things like, oh, you need an extended ISA slot to be able to put this card into here to run these things. And you know how hard it is, how hard it got to find motherboards with extended ISA slots? I bet there are people listening to this podcast that don't even know what the hell an extended ISA slot is.
You should see the glazed over look that my face has right at the moment.
and that's fair. So in that 2006 range, when Laserforce was starting to change over to Windows, the only scorecards that initially got changed over in quotes correctly with all their information were standard games, which from a viable product perspective makes sense. What are 90 to 95% of the games that are played on Laserforce system? They're standard games. So of course that's the scorecard that you want to make sure is correct right off the jump. The problem was that the Space Marines scorecards didn't get updated to actually have information that we all know and love and have come to expect on them. It was definitely after 2008, because 2008 in Ballarat, in order for us to get stats, we had to we recorded the score screen and watched the games back, and we've covered that in an earlier podcast.
Shot yappy.
Yeah. While that was absolutely fantastic from a bonding point of view, getting miserable to have to do every night. And literally that tournament we did scores and we did medikits, and that was it, because there was no fucking way we were going to try to do anything else off of that. So at some point after that, the Space Marines 5 scorecards must have been done in 2009, because I feel pretty certain when Sean reopened the Laserforce in Sacramento, I feel like the scorecards were correct. But I could be, I could have my dates a little bit wrong on that, and I'm sure somebody will correct me on that, because that happens.
It's probably Rusty.
Yeah, probably. But so in amidst all this, he said, basically once the scorecards kind of came back into, actually having data on them, then it kind of that conversation kind of came back up again. Well, it'd be cool to have, kind of know more of, the analytics for lasers, as it were. All the cool stuff as far as what are my hit differentials? Do my hit differentials vary against specific people when I'm playing specific positions? What sort of matchups are most advantageous or least advantageous? Those were all things that the major nerds among us, i.e. all of us, kind of want to know. And so at this point, we basically started with a spreadsheet. It was a spreadsheet that I built, and it was all very cool as far as there were a bunch of named ranges and formulas pulled from different places and this, that, and the other.
It's bragging about his spreadsheets now.
Hey, what was a work of art, and I was super happy with it.
He's got pictures of them in his wallet. Shows it to his workmates.
I'm not going to go that far. But actually, I've jumped slightly ahead. 2011 in Syracuse at that nationals, we were basically trying to manually data entry everything. Like, my spreadsheet was basically getting fed by the manual data entry. And it's ridiculous. It was so there's time spent doing stats manually that's kind of an acceptable range, and then there's just fucking ridiculous, and 2011 was fucking ridiculous. Literally every single minute of my time outside of games was spent doing data entry. It was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So that piece, that was the genesis for kind of coming back and going, there has to be a more automated way that we can at least get the information out of the scorecards. And that was the point at which so originally Lejeune was actually trying to work out how to do it.
Happy birthday, by the way, Juff.
Yeah, Juff. Oh, bro. So he was originally trying to do it, and at this point, I don't think we necessarily. I mean, I think we knew that Renzer wrote code, but I don't think that we knew it, if that makes sense. And I think he overheard us talking about it or something, and he's like, "I can have a look at it, I can come up with," and was like, "Okay." And over the course of probably a couple of months, us giving him samples and him working on, how to get it to parse out, and me telling him, like, this is the information that I want. He created a parser program, and to do was get PDFs, the PDF scorecards, into a directory on my computer. Cool.
And I just have to emphasize again, this is not easy to do. I mean, there are a billion special cases inside these PDFs. The text can get out of sync by a space, and you have to write a whole different way to handle it. I mean, it's something I don't ever want to have to look at or deal with, and I am so glad he did it. And it is, again, I have to accentuate, it is not easy.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we kind of don't write code, or if you don't necessarily interact with developers on a regular basis, you don't necessarily understand the level of effort and the level of work that goes into thing happen. And
you look at those PDF files, they're just text. Can't you just copy the text? Come on, right? Just copy it. It's easy. What are you doing? No. It's horrifying.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if it sounds like, we're slobbering all over Renzer at this point, it's because we totally fucking are. Like literally. So yeah, he creates this parser to put files into a folder. I tell the parser to run, and it outputs a CSV file and directory that all I have to do is copy and paste that into my spreadsheet and refresh my spreadsheet, and all the stats update. The greatest thing ever at this point. This was how I did stats in 2012 and 2013 at both those nationals in Sacramento and in Detroit. That was just the greatest fucking thing ever. Detroit, there was a little bit of an issue in that like one of the names had a special character in it, and it basically caused those scorecards to fail. And so there was a little bit of manual entry that had to be done there. Yeah, there ended up being some manual fixing in Detroit, but overall, like, this is the greatest thing ever.
I have had some words with people over special characters and their code names. That's some very strong words.
Stick to regular character, peoples.
But then after we got back from Detroit in 2013, I think this was about the point, Russ, that you basically were like, so why don't we just have this as a website, or why isn't this just online? And I think my answer was because I have no fucking idea how to do it. Those were my exact words in that conversation.
Yeah, no, I think your memory's spot on. I went and looked at my code history here, and it looks like my first commit on the website is from September 2013. So I think you're like dead on there. Good job, old man brain.
Go me. I actually remembered something. And if I remember right, in the initial, we were basically uploading the CSV file to get to get the stats. So that there was still some manual process in the initial where we'd have to grab the scorecards out, run them through the parser, get the CSV, and then upload the CSV, and it did all the things and made pretty stats that were easy to look at and whatnot.
Yeah, because very much at the time, I think you were posting stuff on the old Laserforce forums every night. You would go and just put up some kind of little summary data into a post every night. And so I think my initial plan was, well, I'll just copy what he's got in a website format. So that was, I think, kind of the very original version of it, was just really replicating what you had done. And then it just grew from there. People just kept asking for more things.
Well, and then in amidst that growth, at some point in there, I can't remember whether Renzer approached you or you approached Renzer about rewriting the parser to be a web service, so all we had to do was upload the PDFs. I mean, obviously that conversation happened because that's how we do it now, is the PDFs get uploaded and magic happens behind the scenes and suddenly there are stats and it's fucking fantastic.
Yeah, it's and it's been great fun to do all that. And I think the only reason it didn't happen earlier in 2012 was because I was having a baby at the time. My wife was, but anyway, I had to wait till he got a little bit older before I could actually spend some time on it.
Lazy.
But, details, excuses. Totally excuses.
But it was sort of great fun to start going through that and seeing where we could get more data. And it's grown very organically over time. The code base itself is a horrifying mess. Please don't look at my GitHub page. It's not pretty. There's a lot that's hacked together, and I'm sometimes amazed that it actually does work as well as it does. But truly everything that's on there really has grown out of things that people have asked for and things that people have said, could we see this? Well, what if we showed us this way? What if we had the data this way? And, it's expanded and grown and shows just so many different things now, just based on the drive, mostly of people in Sacramento, because we're the ones who've been using it more. But now that Brisbane is using it, now that Auckland is using it, even St. George is getting some good use out of it. We're starting to get, or I've been getting, kind of cool, interesting requests from everybody that has been fun to try and implement, or haven't had to say no that often every now and then.
So if you have any requests, kids, just send either us or Russ a message and we'll see what kind of magic he can whip up.
Yeah, Odin's Fist was asking me stuff just last night that I'm working on this afternoon. So.
Excellent.
And it's actually, kind of cool when you go back and you look at the stats site now. It's it's got the stats for competitions now from like internationals 2014 on, and then from a social aspect, we've got all these different sites that, I mean, Chula Vista was using it, Brisbane's using it, Detroit's using it, Invasion was using it, briefly in San Marcos. Detroit's using it, Auckland uses it. Obviously, Sacramento's been using it for the longest for obvious reasons. Loveland was using it, St. George is using it, and Syracuse. So, pretty much every site that has any type of competitive play going on, is using this site now to track their track their games, and just being able to have this kind of just rich database of games. I mean, if you had told me 10 years ago, we're going to have this, and you're going to be able to like look up basically, any tournament or any social night or whatever that people upload stuff for, I've been like, I mean, that sounds really cool, but I think you're wrong, but okay. Here it is, and people love it.
It's been fun watching people use it as a tool as well. Like Brisbane, especially in their most recent league, as they're gearing up for the upcoming internets. I've talked to Rusty, I've talked to Taipan a lot. Listen to the way that they review stats and think about the other players and look at how those players are interacting, looking at hit diff, looking at who's getting their bases, looking at kind of all these details and kind of the conclusions they can glean from that data. And it's fascinating to watch, and it's fun to try and support them and as they're coming up with different ideas on ways to use it and ways to get value out of it. So
I've in my personal prep for Nats, I've started doing a little bit more exercise than I otherwise normally would in my everyday life, and I've been able to use the stats website to actually track the results of that fitness into how I play Laserforce. I can actually see a massive jump in my stats from when I started training, or a couple weeks into my training regime to now. So it's been pretty cool for me personally, to be able to do that.
Oh wow, yeah. Look, I'm looking at your nice big spike, don't you?
Yeah,
on your MVP points and your score.
It's huge. It's made a massive difference, and having this as a tool to be able to track that is amazing. Like, it's one more reason to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Oh, how fun.
Well, and then,
it warms my heart when I hear stuff like that. It really does. So when we talk about MVP points and kind of the history of them, as far as I know, Traj certainly had a lot to do with that, and Nite Owl, I think. So, when they were first coming up with it, was it a number that was supposed to be something where you could compare it across positions or just within positions? I've sort of been curious about like what their thought process was.
So in the original, it was both. I mean, obviously, yeah, it's easy to come up with a number that you can compare, all commanders against all commanders, relative, bell curve, this, that, the other. But there was kind of this additional idea, in as much as, I mean, who normally wins most valuable player? The commander, usually. There was kind of this idea that can we come up with something that not only you're ranking each position within itself, so able to relatively rank positions against each other. Now, obviously, it's not something that is necessarily perfect even at this point. There's that. You're always going to have some differentials in how just certain positions are just going to be more powerful than others, and trying to get those to smooth out is challenging at the best of times.
Yeah, I've tried to play around a little bit with taking large swaths of the stats and moving some of the sliders here and there to see if I can get everything to line up a little bit more. Like, can I get everything within two standard deviations of like 15 for every position, or if I adjust things like this or like that? And I never was able to figure out a way to get it to feel good. It always kind of felt a little bit forced. In terms of trying to get it to be a number that you could actually compare, like, well, a 15-point commander game and a 15-point medic game. Well, those are both average games. And, it's a nice idea, but I certainly haven't been able to figure it out. So now really it's more like a 20-point commander game is good and a 15-point medic game is pretty decent. So I don't know.
It's definitely never going to be perfect. I think where we've gotten it to over the years with the massaging of the score thresholds for points and the accuracy thresholds for points and rounding values for scouts hitting 3 hits and power boost values for ammos and medics and stuff like that. I think we've gotten it to a relatively good place. Anybody with way more math background than most of us have wants to have a look at it and try to, smooth things out even further. I'm all for that. But I don't necessarily, I'm not looking at the thing right now and going, oh my God, it's so far out of whack and terrible that, we need to make immediate changes to it.
Yeah, I think people certainly need to look at it as, you shouldn't be comparing a heavy's MVP number to a commander's because they're just going to be fundamentally different.
Well, they play different roles in the game, so.
Yeah, and those numbers, a 20-point heavy game is different than a 20-point commander game. They're just not comparable at this point. And I don't know that everybody really looks at it that way. I kind of feel like there's often, I've heard from people, well, how can we bring heavy up? Can we adjust the heavy score threshold? Heavy doesn't get enough MVP points. And I think the thought has to be, well, heavy does get enough MVP points. You just can't compare it to commanders.
Do you think that the whole argument around the elimination bonus is kind of in that same boat? The elimination bonus exists because of data we're missing in the scorecards, right? And this is another interesting conversation about what kind of data we'd like to have in the scorecard. So right now, we don't know how long a game actually is. If it's an elimination, that game could have been anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes long, and we just don't know. It's weird. It seems like a thing that would be relatively easy to find out.
It would be. It's just not something that's logged.
Right.
Than made the point earlier, Space Marines doesn't sell systems, so the developers there aren't spending time on, updating the scorecard.
Yeah.
But if we're able to say, not only here's how long a game was, but here's actually how much time each player was in the game, then we could start doing, I think, some really much more interesting things where we start talking about, well, what are your per 10-minute stats, for instance? Are you scoring 20 MVP per 10 minutes as a commander? That's great. Or maybe what does that look like? And then you could get rid of that elimination bonus because, it's already reflected in the match bonus you get. And then, again, it kind of only exists to pump up MVP scores where you get quick elims. If you sit back as commander and farm 14K, you're going to have more MVPs than if you elim and only get 9K. Yeah,
so, and that's a big, maybe not so much for the local games, but that's quite a big bonus factor, I guess, for nationals because, if you put more emphasis on running the games quicker without your MVP stats suffering for it, if that's the thing that you actually care about, then, we can rip through a lot more games a lot quicker as opposed to, stretching the game out and farming.
Well, and that is the downside to stats that we get into, isn't it? Because now if you have stats, the concept of stat padding starts to exist.
But I guess you get that with
players
with any sport, right? What's more important, the championship or your stats?
Yeah, well, you make a good point. I just I don't like it when the stats encourage bad gameplay. That I find that very frustrating whenever I see somebody thinking of, oh, well, I've got to farm before I nuke because I got to catch up on my MVP points so I get ranked a certain way.
Yeah.
Especially in a tournament setting where it's like, come on, man, you got a game to win here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And again, I guess maybe that's a philosophical difference.
Well, and to be fair, also, I mean that was one of the discussions that I know that we had kind of in this element was it's that whole observation theory that like the minute you start observing something, its behavior changes. If you start actually measuring people's performance, well, then I do X, Y, Z so that I look better. Yeah. So, and that's something that I don't necessarily think, as long as we're measuring, output, that's always going to be a concern, or not necessarily a concern, but it's always going to be an issue. But I would go so far as to say that I don't necessarily think people are going to be throwing their chances at winning games just to make their MVP stats look better. And if they are, they're a terrible teammate, and you should never play with them again.
Yeah, and I think MVP on its own, the things that I should say, the actions that give you points in general accentuate good gameplay. I mean, it's things you should be doing. Yeah. The only one that's awkward is scout rapid fires. That one still bugs me because if you actually want to maximize that, you have to like burn a rapid fire and get resupplied. Burn a rapid fire, get resupplied.
Yeah.
That's the only one that doesn't flow naturally that bothers me.
Yeah, I mean we had the reason for doing it, because if you're using rapid fire, you should be being more effective, easier to take down a 3-hit and all that. But yeah, you can run into some very strange situations, and I remember hearing about a league game in Brisbane. This was many years ago now, where somebody literally had 70 specials as a scout. Tap, rapid fire, tap, rapid fire, and basically got some cheap MVP points. That may have been before we lowered the multiplier on it. I'm pretty sure at one point rapid fire was 1 point per, and I think now it's I think now it's half a point per.
It is.
But that change got made, pretty quickly.
That's a good thing too.
If I remember correctly.
I had another question on the way the score thresholds are done. Is there a reason it's every 1,000 points and not sort of gradated by decimals within the 1,000-point tier? Because it sort of bothers me that a commander can score 9,900, but if he shot one more person, he'd get a whole extra MVP point by getting the 10K.
Because I'm lazy.
Well, I was legitimately curious if that's something maybe I would like to bring up about changing.
I mean, when the score thresholds were originally done, one of my earlier sheets now, it was just easier for me to build the ranges at exact numbers, and those ranges were discussed and kind of tweaked around, but it was just easier. And now the other thing with the ranges as they were set assuming that you only had 2 targets to get.
Right.
That's something else that can kind of skew between when you're looking at MVP points is if you've got an arena where they've got 3 gettable targets as opposed to 2, they see some slightly higher MVP scores because they've got that extra 1,000 points to get them closer to that threshold quicker.
Yeah, but I will tell you
right now, if a scorecard with 3 bases comes in, it will break the website.
So there's your challenge for the week, kids.
Please don't.
My baby.
No, but that's interesting though, because one of the things I've been thinking about too as I look at MVP is, and especially as we look at some of the stats more in depth, hit diff looks to be sort of a really useful stat to say how well someone's doing. And right now, hit diff only really gets reflected in MVP in terms of how good your score is. Right, you get shot less, your score is going to be higher. So I think I'm probably going to bring up to the committee a modification to MVP that says, well, why don't we do hundreds of decimal points above these score thresholds? Keeping the score thresholds the same, but maybe getting some gradation in the MVP points there to kind of get a little more granular detail on them. I don't know, you guys tell me if I'm crazy.
Well, I mean, you are crazy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not an idea worth pursuing. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the original math that was done and a lot of the original thresholds that were done, I mean, yeah, it was quick named ranges in Excel, and while you can start getting into gradations doing that, it's a pain in the ass. Yeah, I mean,
see, it's real easy for me on the website. So,
whereas when the thresholds were being built, it's like, there's literally, it's like, here are the six or seven numbers that I want to trigger on to either give you points or not. Get more granular than that, it just becomes more effort on my part, and I don't like you guys that much.
Well, and that was one of the really early bugs on the website too, was I was giving everybody an extra MVP points because I had the threshold math wrong.
The good old days.
You had one job, and I gave you the formulas. You had one job.
Still messed it up.
That's fine, I guess.
So, do you think we've touched on a bunch of stuff?
We have touched on a bunch of stuff, and I think there's other smart people out there in the community who, if they have ideas or thoughts about how stats can be displayed, or even if there's thoughts about how MVP might be modified, again, with the caveat that it has been pretty well thought through over the years. But if there are, actual interesting ideas out there, I'd love to hear them.
I think one of the things that people, kind of have this potential misconception that, we're not open to feedback from the community about stuff. We're very much open to feedback from the community about pretty much about everything. It's just, you have to, the only caveat to that is, because these are all things that have been happening for a very long time in some cases, the feedback that comes forward is like, well, we have already tried that 5 years ago and 9 years ago and 15 years ago. We really want to cover the same ground again necessarily.
Right.
But if you're newer to the community, you wouldn't necessarily know that some of these things have been tried. So, if you are newer to the community, have ideas, let us know about them. It is very, very possible. Yes, it's possible that we've done it in the past and it for whatever, it didn't work for XYZ reason, but maybe the XYZ reason was the technology wasn't there for us to be able to properly implement the idea, and now it's something that is worth revisiting.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's worth bringing those ideas forward. I mean, if people have extra ideas about MVP, if they've got extra ideas about how they want the data to display, if they've got extra ideas about Laserforce in general,
send them through.
Believe it or not, I may be a jerk 90% of the time, but I do want to hear your ideas.
If only for the reason to shoot them down.
I mean, that's fun too, but no, it's because of how long this community has been around, and because of how many kind of iterations of player cycles have been through it, and how many you kind of get a new crop of players every 3 to 4 to 5 years that kind of cycle in, cycle out. If you it's sometimes nice to also be able to, give a little bit of the history to newer players as well. And then it's also nice to get corrected because I've misremembered something, because that's happened a few times as well, for sure.
So that's all pretty riveting information about stats, which, I never thought I would ever say that sentence, but there you go. Thanks so much to Russ for joining us this week. I know, it doesn't take much peer pressure to get you in on the mic talking about stats, but we appreciate
it. Really doesn't.
We appreciate you coming on here and talking about one of your passions. Yeah, so thanks heaps, man.
Thank you.
All right, well, for this week, I've been Guy Next Door.
And I've been Than.
Always remember to backtrack, kids. See you next week.